Good afternoon. It's my special privilege and actual personal pleasure, having known the ambassador for several years in his capacity when he was Consul General here in New York, to welcome you to today's World Leaders Forum. We will be hearing from the ambassador first, and then he and Professor Scott Barrett will consider the issues on Euro-American relations in this time of a set of very numerous and quite complex international events. Over these past several weeks, it has been the pleasure and privilege of Columbia to host a number of world leaders events in which distinguished foreign dignitaries from around the world have come to campus. Today we welcome someone who has been a special friend to Columbia. As I said, I met him when he was here in his last rotation through New York, and his support and guidance helped develop the alliance and support it to the success it has become today. It is, however, today in his role as one of the players on the world stage that we welcome him to the World Leaders Forum and that we thank him for being with us. The World Leaders Forum started nearly a decade ago, and it has become over the intervening years a remarkable opportunity for our entire academic community, faculty, students, and alumni. We have come to expect year in and year out at the arrival of autumn that it will bring with it also visits from the dignitaries from around the world who bring with them their special energy and interests that help us explore the things that are going on in the world today. As someone who's had the privilege of participating in them since they began a decade ago, I am pleased that it is the specialness of this event that makes each autumn something to look forward to. It's an event that would be impossible, if not difficult, to replicate on almost any other campus or in any other city. The university is grateful that the many leaders who come here are willing to participate and to open themselves to the conversations with our faculty and students. Among the co-sponsors of today's event are the Columbia-Paris Alliance, which is a consortium of Columbia and 3 of the leading research universities in Paris, Paris 1, Sciences Po, and École Polytechnique. Within the alliance, students at Columbia have the opportunity to participate in dual degree programs, to be taught by faculty from the 3 Paris institutions when they come here on the faculty exchanges, and to work in research projects and listen to transatlantic debate on the leading political issues of our time. Another sponsor of today's event is the Earth Institute. The Earth Institute is the world's leading research and education entity focused on the topic of sustainable development. Participating with the ambassador today is Scott Barrett. He's the Lenfest Earth Institute Professor of Natural Resource Economics. His focus has been on the norms, treaties, resolutions, and customs that foster international cooperation. Scott's been a consultant to the UN, OECD, the World Bank, and to the European Commission. He has written several books on the topics of climate and climate treaties, as well as on the area of the economics of topics such as the feasibility of conquering malaria. I'm going to let Professor Barrett do the introduction of our guest. We welcome you and thank you for coming today.
Well, thank you, Roxy, for that terrific introduction for everyone. My role here is to introduce the ambassador and then to give him the opportunity to offer his remarks to us. I will very discreetly give him a little time warning just in case he takes a little longer than we wanted. I told him that professors were rather prone to do this, and apparently ambassadors are also inclined in that direction. So that's my role, and then after that I'll probably make a few remarks. He and I may exchange a little bit, and then we'll open up to the audience, and I'll moderate questions for the ambassador from the audience. But first I want to introduce Ambassador Delattre. He was appointed Ambassador of France to the United States in February 2011, following several North American postings. He was previously Ambassador to Canada, Consul General in New York, and Press and Communications Director at the French Embassy in Washington. Before becoming the Foreign Minister's Deputy Chief of Staff, Mr. Delattre monitored defense issues as well as European and transatlantic security concerns. He was responsible for these issues, including the Bosnia crisis, as a member of President Jacques Chirac's foreign policy team. Mr. Delattre was responsible for these same portfolios as a staffer for Foreign Minister Alain Juppé, following 2 years at the Department of Strategic Affairs and Disarmament at the Quai d'Orsay. Before that, he served at the French Embassy in Bonn, Germany, where he was notably in charge, and this makes me very happy, of environmental issues and Germany's economic integration following reunification. So welcome, Mr. Ambassador, and if you could now give your remarks. And
over there?
Yes, please. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. Can you hear me? Yes. I will try to make it short so that you can see the end of the presidential debate tonight. I'll do my best. You know, when I've been the ambassador in your great country for 20 months now, and when I presented my credential, no politics here, of course, but when I presented my credential to President Obama 18 months ago, he told me, in the Oval Office, so it was quite intimidating, he told me, Ambassador, I think you are probably the youngest French ambassador appointed to the United States, to which I really didn't know what to answer, so I blushed. But I had to say something, and the only thing I could say was, Mr. President, I don't know whether I'm the youngest, but I'm by far the happiest of all ambassadors, and since then, every time we meet, which is not every morning, but every time we cross paths, he told me, Ambassador, are you still the happiest? And I always answer more than ever. So you can call me Mr. More Than Ever. It will be more simple than Delattre, this impossible French name. It's so good to be with you this afternoon. Great pleasure and a true honor to be with you, with our cultural counselor, Antonin Baudry, deputy, Christophe Musitelli, and all the team of the cultural services at the embassy. And it's so good to see so many friends and familiar faces. I want to thank you all collectively, because if I begin to mention Paul Leclerc, the chair of the board of the Maison Française, and Nicholas Dungan, and Robert Paxton, I say it the French way, Robert Paxton, I will be in big trouble. But thank you all for taking the time. I want to say a very special word of thanks to Vice Provost Roxy Smith, Professor Nicholas Dirks, and Professor Scott Barrett. And I'm very grateful to the World Leaders Forum for organizing this event with our co-sponsors, the Alliance Programme and its director, Alessia Lefebvre, the Earth Institute, the Maison Française, I mentioned Paul Leclerc, Shani Pierre, of course, its director, and the School of International and Public Affairs. You know, there is a strong and growing partnership between Colombia and my country and France in many fields. And for the last 10 years, Colombia has had a very special link to France with the Alliance Programme, this exemplary program between Colombia in France, Colombia in the US, Paris 1, Polytechnique and Sciences Po in Paris, in France, has become a model for education and research partnerships. Alliance is a true success story, as witnessed by the breadth of its programs and activities, about 20 dual degrees and joint degrees that offer an integrated education across the Atlantic, but also internships programs, mobility grants, scholarships, joint research projects in all fields, visiting professorships, and public lectures, of course. I must tell you that building such innovative and sustainable partnerships between American universities and French universities and grandes écoles is at the core of my priorities, at the very core of the French Embassy's mission in higher education cooperation. This is the main objective of the Embassy's Partner University Fund program, which currently funds 66 partnerships in all disciplines and fields. And I must tell you, there is no day, every single day, we conclude an agreement between a French and an American university, an exchange of students, a joint PhD, a co-master. This is probably the most dynamic part of the French-American partnership today. You asked me to give a French perspective about the current and future state of Euro-American relations in times of crisis. Well, I profoundly believe that despite the crisis, the context could not be more favorable in this respect, and that there are many new opportunities today, not only to strengthen the French-American and the Euro-American partnership, but really to bring them to a new level for the years and maybe even for the decades to come. I think the first opportunity is the fact that the US and France, the US and Europe, today share to a large extent the same vision of the world, and it was not always the case in the past. On the strategic front, we have left behind the simple certainties of the bipolar world, stable but unjust. We are no longer in the unipolar world that appeared to oversimplify between the two Iraq wars. We live more and more in what we tend to call a multipolar world, and in what the Obama administration tends to name the multi-partner world. The concepts, as you can see, are very close. The fact is that the meteoric rise of China, India, Brazil in particular, to name just a few of the emerging countries, is creating a whole new situation which brings us closer together. So the question, and it is, I believe, one of the main challenges of our generation, is to know whether we'll be able collectively to shape, to organize a multi-partner, multipolar world in which every player feels comfortable and in which the principle of responsible partnership can prevail over those of competition and rivalry. And history shows it's not easy. The subsequent question is to know whether we should do it, shape it, this world, through a more effective multilateralism within the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, NATO, through a new concert of great powers with the G8 and more the G20, or more convincingly, we believe, through a combination of the two. The US and France, the US and Europe are working very closely together on this. France, for example, has been instrumental, and you know the traditional French modesty, but France has been instrumental in establishing and promoting the G20, and we French are working very hard to promote the enlargement of the UN Security Council with new permanent members such as India, Brazil, Germany, Japan, and a fair representation of Africa. So that's point number one on the strategic front. Now, on the economic front, the main challenge, I believe, is how to overcome the current crisis, of course, but also how to face the growing competition coming from the emerging world, which is also an opportunity for us. And here it's important to remember that the transatlantic partnership remains the backbone of the world economy in terms of trade, cross-investment, and innovation. In this respect, by the way, I believe there is a slow but profound change in the transatlantic relationship from an inward-looking, security-centered, NATO-based partnership to a much broader, outward-looking partnership in which our shared interests play a key role. Two examples of that. At the heart of the transatlantic dialogue today, you have the question of the intellectual property rights. How do we, Europeans and Americans, make sure that our vision of the intellectual property rights are shared in China, in Brazil, in India, in Asia in the more general term? Second example, how do we collectively better fight against social dumping, environmental dumping, monetary dumping, while, of course, avoiding any kind of protectionism? Here, the key question is how do we collectively establish a level playing field in which every player has the same advantages. So my message here is that based on our common interests, but also on the values that we share, the transatlantic partnership has never been as important as today, both on the strategic front and on the economic one. The real lesson here, I believe, is that the more Asia is rising, and again, it's a good thing, the more Europe is relevant for you Americans as America's natural partner and as America's key partner in the world. It's true on the diplomatic and security front, where the Franco-British couple is at the heart of European defense capabilities, is at the heart of the capabilities of the Europeans to project forces abroad, as we recently saw in Libya. It's also true on the economic and monetary front, where the Franco-German leadership, German-French leadership, is a condition for Europe to go forward. So France, and here again you recognize the so well-known French modesty and humility, France is at the junction of the two couples, the Franco-British couple on European and defense issues, the German-French couple on economic and monetary issues. Now, what about the integration, the European integration process? Where are we in this process? As you know, one of France's key priorities is to strengthen Europe's position as a global player in the 21st century, better able to promote its values and its interests in partnership with the United States. I'd like to make 3 quick points on this. First, the European integration process was originally, first and foremost, and remains to a large extent, an unprecedented process in world history to bring conflicting nations together. It's a war and peace issue, so to speak. And that's what the recent Nobel Peace Prize means a lot, because it recognizes this endeavor in the depth and breadth of our history. Point number 2, the EU is already much more than a free trade and a single market. With its 500 million people, the EU is today the world's leading economic and trade power in the world. It also provides 60% of the world's total development aid. The EU is slowly but surely asserting itself in the world stage with a president, Herman van Rompuy, with the equivalent of a foreign minister, Lady Ashton, and with a new European diplomatic service. Now, a few words on this about the situation in the Eurozone. I think it's important to put things in perspective here. The euro is a teenager. He or she is 13 years old. And if you think about it, in 13 years, the euro has been a great success story. A great success story for us, Europeans, in terms of projecting much more financial and monetary stability compared to the many devaluations that was Europe's plague a few decades ago. A great success story for us also in terms of job creation. In 13 years, the Eurozone created 14 million jobs compared to 8 million jobs created during the same period of time in the US. But it's also important to keep in mind that the euro has been a great success story for our American friends. Remember, 15 years ago, the American press was full of fears about a fortress Europe. And it's exactly the opposite that happened. The euro was a very efficient leverage to promote investment and exports to the European Union. That's point number one, a great success story. Point number two, don't forget that the euro is a very solid currency, contrary to what we keep reading here and there. In terms of exchange rate against the dollar, the euro is still today 15 to 20% higher than it was at its introduction 13 years ago. In the same vein, the euro has become, at a record speed, the second largest currency reserve in the world. 27% of the currency reserves in the world today are in euro. So number two, a very solid currency. And number three, and please spread the word, of course it's very difficult to bring 17 democracies together. We will always be too slow in comparison with the expectations of the financial markets. But you have to keep in mind that we Europeans, and again under German-French leadership, with our other partners of course, we are seriously addressing the three key issues that we have to meet. First issue is to tighten the belt, to tackle our debts and deficits. We have no choice. We simply went too far, and it's not a political question anymore in France, for example. We simply went too far in terms of the size of the government. So we have to reduce our debts, to reduce our deficits, to cut red tape. That's why France adopted last week a $35 billion consolidation plan, for example. So that's chapter one, tackle our debts and deficits. And this chapter, so to speak, has a German accent, should I say. Chapter two is about, at the same time, promoting growth, not through public spending, would be a contradiction with chapter one, but through structural reforms to promote innovation, to promote entrepreneurship, to try to slowly open the door for a more flexible labor market. That's chapter two, promoting growth, and this chapter has my accent, a strong French accent. And chapter three of the Eurozone endeavor is to establish a new governance in the Eurozone, allowing a better convergence of the European economies. When we founded the euro 13 years ago, we founded a wonderful monetary union, but we forgot about the economic and financial leg of it. The economic leg is about better coordination of our economic, social, and fiscal policies. We have already made some good progress in this direction. And the economic leg is about the union banking, the bigger ECB role. And I will tell you something, we Europeans, at the end of this crisis, will be stronger, better equipped to avoid such a crisis from happening in the future, and therefore better partners for our American friends. Now, a few words against this backdrop about France and the situation in the Eurozone. One word about France. There is something I want you to know, is that my country wants to be, will be on the winning side of globalization. We have many assets in a globalized economy to succeed. Let me just briefly mention three of them. We are, in France, the demographic exception in Europe. There is only one European country, together with Ireland, to be honest, but two European countries having a growing population, France and Ireland, while every single other European country has a declining, and for many of them, rapidly, quickly declining population, number one. Number two, if you ask me, Ambassador or Francois, what is today's France's priority? I would answer without any hesitation that innovation is the number one, number two, number three priority. That's why, for example, we established in my country a few years ago 71 innovation clusters, pôles de compétitivité, bringing together the American way, the private sector, the industry, the universities, and the research labs. And it works. For the same reason, we put in place what is today the highest R&D tax credit in the industrialized world, and it keeps attracting new foreign investment. In the same vein, we are investing in my country within the framework of what we call the Investment for the Future program, $60 billion over a period of 4 years of private and public money to encourage research, innovation, and higher education, especially in the three key technological revolutions of today: the revolution of green tech, sustainable development, renewables, energy, where France is among the world leaders. Number two, the revolution in life sciences, genomics, genetics, where France is also very strong through the Pasteur Institute, the Curie Institute in the fight against breast cancer, but also pharmaceutical companies like Sanofi, and I could go on and on. And three, we want to be better to reach the critical mass in terms of the digital revolution, and we are heavily investing in this direction. The interesting thing is that, and it's a bit counterintuitive, this unprecedented effort in terms of innovation goes hand in hand with a booming entrepreneurship in France. Over the last year, we founded more than 600,000 new businesses in France. It's a record high in Europe. It's a spectacular increase compared to previous years. It says a lot about the vitality of the French economy. It says a lot about the fact that the younger generations in France today, instead of knocking on my door, instead of knocking on the government's door, they roll up their sleeves, start a business, fail because c'est la vie, start again, and at the end of the day succeed. But it also says a lot about the fact that we were able in my country to severely cut red tape. And that if you are gifted, which is not my case but yours, you can start a business in France in 15 minutes online. So please spread the word, because it's counterintuitive compared to many reports that we see in the American and international, but mostly American press. And this booming entrepreneurship, this booming innovation process are the two key fundamentals of the vitality of the French economy. Now, French-American relations, and I will close with this, French-American relations, and this is good news, have never been closer than they are today, as illustrated by President Hollande's very successful visit to Washington. It was last May, literally 3 days after President Hollande's inauguration. And since then, if you think about it, on the diplomatic front, our two countries are in the forefront of international efforts to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state. I would think it's the number one priority. A nuclear-armed Iran is not an option for many reasons. One, it would mean an immediate and existential threat for the security of Israel, would be enough a reason to make it unacceptable. Number two, a nuclear-armed Iran would trigger an arms race and potentially a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. That's the last thing we need in what is the most volatile region of the world. And 3, a nuclear-armed Iran would mean the demise, the death of the international non-proliferation regime that we together patiently built over the last decades. In the same vein, we together, I mean our 2 countries together prevailed over Gaddafi in Libya, bringing 42 years of a bloody dictatorship to an end. Let me tell you, by the way, how close we French feel to our American friends after the killing of the US ambassador and 3 of his colleagues in Benghazi. We are working very closely together to settle the crisis in Syria, where Assad must go, the sooner the better. We are each other's closest allies in the fight against terrorism, where we French bring in this fight our unique expertise in the fight against radical Islamist networks, coming back 30 years ago when Paris was under attack. And I mean, I could go on and on. On the economic front, it's the same. Our partnership is growing stronger every year. Please keep in mind that we French are in the top 5 foreign investors in this country, with 3,000 French companies supporting more than 600,000 American jobs. Conversely, the US is the #1 foreign investor in France, and American investment in my country increased by more than 40% over the last 4 years. So the picture, again, cannot be more favorable in many respects, despite the crisis. To conclude, let me tell you that the most important, the treasure that we have in terms of French-American and Euro-American partnerships is the values that we share. Let's never forget that our 2 countries owe each other their very existence as free nations. Let's never forget that from Yorktown and Lafayette to the battlefields of World War I and the beaches of Normandy, we have always been shoulder to shoulder to promote the values of freedom and democracy that we together gave the world. For the last commemoration of D-Day, on June the 6th of last year, it was the 68th anniversary of D-Day, I went to the military academy here to bestow, in West Point, to bestow the Legion of Honor, France's highest distinction, upon 38 American veterans of World War II. I can tell you that was one of the most moving experiences of my life. I will never forget it. There was no dry eye in the room, and mine were probably the least dry of all. So in today's testing, challenging times, precisely, by the way, because we live in testing and challenging times, these values that we share remain our best tool, I would even say our best moral compass to confront together the current challenges we face. J'ai été un peu trop long comme d'habitude, but thank you very much for your attention. Merci beaucoup.
Well, those remarks were very much appreciated. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then after the ambassador answers those, I'll turn to the audience. So you might start preparing your questions. There's a microphone here. I gather people will need to queue up behind it to ask their questions. It's certainly true that relations between France and the United States are very close now, very close, and a lot closer than they have been for quite some time. And you use this term about the multi-polar world, and you also mentioned the Obama term, I think it was, about multi-partnerships.
Yeah. Multi-partner world. Yeah.
Multi-partner world. And, you know, it raises questions about how much our 2 countries or even the United States in alliance with the entire EU can address many of the issues we face today. So it's true that in the case of Libya, France took a leading role, no question about it. But it was the partnership really of France, the United States, and the UK that was able to, obviously with NATO behind it, able to offer first protection to the insurgents in Libya, and then, of course, to topple the government of Gaddafi. But a lot of the other issues we face require kind of a broader, you mentioned the G20, and they require a broader set of partners. And I'm wondering how you think the relationship between the U.S. and France, the U.S. and the EU, can provide the kind of leverage to address all these other issues we have, including, you mentioned the crisis involving Iran's nuclear program, and there are, of course, many others we could mention. So what are the issues that the U.S. and France, the U.S. and the EU can address together, and what are the issues where they can't, and how do we address those other ones?
I think it's, if I may, it's a very good question. You have three cases, actually, from a theoretical point of view. The first one is when you have EU-US negotiations per se, or where the EU can make a difference as a body. Typically, it's about the trade issues, where the EU is the #1 trade body in the world. The second example is on defense issues. And here again, keep in mind that together with the British, we, France and Britain, account for 60% of the total military spending of the 27 members of the European Union. So we are really the backbone of this effort in terms of European defense. And that's why in Libya, you mentioned it rightly so, I believe, in Libya, we were the only European countries able to project a significant power in terms of airplanes and so on and so forth. And the third example is economic and monetary cooperation. And here I would say it's more balanced, but still the German-French couple remains on economic and monetary issues the indispensable couple. Without the input of the two countries, you cannot achieve anything. Speaking a few minutes ago of European defense, I want to welcome Philippe Camus, who is one of the major French and I would say European CEOs, and here with us tonight. And also want to say thank you for Pierre-André Chiappori, who just arrived, speaking of economics. But to make a long story short, you have the three cases, and the EU is not necessarily a partner per se, can be on trade issues, but mostly when it's about defense, when it's about economic cooperation within the G20, for example, you have the key European partners acting together and making a difference. Iran is a very good example. Regarding negotiations with Iran, you have the French, the British, and the Germans acting together, side by side with our American friends, with our Chinese and Russian friends too, to try to convince Iran to change course. And we have the backing of Lady Ashton. We have the backing of the European Union. But at the end of the day, you have to have somebody to take the lead, to act. And that's what the three countries do.
So my other question is about crisis. And we have a lot of those. So they're very much on our minds. Now, there's the view that to address a lot of issues, we need to work together through these partnerships. But there's often a reason not to work together. Our interests aren't always perfectly aligned. We have disagreements. We have different priorities. Things don't get done. But if you look at the great achievements over the last 60, 70 years, many of them have been born from crisis. For example, the United Nations itself, which was created even before the Second World War was concluded, that was born from crisis. More recently, the SARS outbreak, I think it was around 2004 in China. Before that, there were years of negotiations to develop something called the International Health Regulations, kind of global rules for infectious diseases. They made no progress at all. And then when we had this crisis, the World Health Organization took steps that they were not allowed to take, and the rest of the world said, thank you, and changed the regulations very rapidly. More recently, of course, there's the euro crisis. And in the case of the euro, there were concerns when the euro was born, or even before the euro was born, about the fiscal side and how it's very difficult to see to a number of people that you could have a single monetary union without unifying the fiscal dimension of economic policy. And there was an agreement that was put together to address this called the Stability and Growth Pact. And when that agreement was called upon to do its work, it basically crumbled. And now, in the midst of crisis, as you called it, German-French couple, I think was the word. Other people called it, in those days, Merkozy, put together a arrangement for what's now called a fiscal union. It really goes beyond what was contemplated before, and I think the reason for that is that today we're in a crisis. So it looks like the international community can get things done when hard pressed, but a lot of the issues we face aren't really like this. They're very slow, accumulating problems, and any one day you can ignore them and not worry too much about them, but you wait too long and then things can get very bad, and it may be too late, at least too late to address them properly. And I noted that the Earth Institute is a co-sponsor. I am a member of the Earth Institute, and one of the concerns that I have is over climate change. And climate change is very much one of these issues. In fact, I was struck that when the last negotiations were convened in Durban at the end of the last year, not a lot. I mean, some things were achieved, but not an awful lot. While at the same time, there were emergency meetings taking place in Europe over the Euro crisis, where again, a great deal was achieved in a very short time, because it had to be. So my question for you about crisis, Rahm Emanuel said that a crisis is not to be wasted. I think a lot of us would agree that there's an opportunity there. But my question is, do we actually have to have a crisis to address these kinds of issues? Or is it possible that we can act knowing that there are crises ahead of us?
I think it's a very good point that you just made. I'll give you three examples to try to illustrate, and I think you're right in your comments. The first is about the European integration. We all feel that in order to overcome the crisis of the euro, of the Eurozone, and again, I'm very optimistic about it, we are going to succeed in a new step forward in terms of integration. Banking union, fiscal union, and at the end of the day, political union. No doubt about it. Second example, you mentioned the G8, the G20. Here, I believe one of the major challenges of our generations is to make sure that the emerging powers, A, feel integrated in the international institutions, they feel at ease so that they don't contest this world order. They have their place, they have a bigger say. That's what we do at the IMF, at the World Bank, within the UN. And B, to make sure that these emerging countries, in doing so, have their share of responsibilities in today's world. That leads me to your third point, which is climate change, global warming. We tend to consider that this is, we French, and we Europeans, that this is an important issue, this is a major issue, that this is the responsibility of our generation to tackle the roots of this global warming that could endanger humanity in the long run. That's one of the issues where we gently encourage our American friends to get mobilized. It's not easy for reasons I don't judge here. It's not easy, but still, we think we have to work together with the US administration on this. There are many positive signs, according to me, to us. For example, the way your private sector is heavily investing in CCS, in fighting against CO2 emission, the way many of your states, like California, cities, New York being the best example, want to make what I would call green investment is very encouraging. So in the US, under your watch, I think there is an important and positive change in this respect too, vis-à-vis global warming, bottom up from the private sector, from the cities, from the states, toward the federal government. And that makes me quite optimistic on this. But again, the new element for us all, and for me in my job as ambassador, is that in today's world, everything is collective. If we want to make things happen, if we want to be real doers on the world scene, we have to convince, on a case-by-case basis, a coalition of the willing, so to speak, to get emerging powers on board, and then we can advance our agenda in global warming, in disarmament, in the fight against non-proliferation. So it's not a bilateral game or the addition of bilateral games. That was diplomacy in the last century. It's not a balance of power game anymore. It's really how do we convince our partners, because we are all partners, to act together to tackle collective challenges to the entire humanity, quite frankly.
I couldn't agree more. All right, wonderful. So I've asked my two questions, and now I'm going to turn to the audience. And if each speaker could, first of all, if you could introduce yourself, and then I'm sure your intention was to be brief, but just in case people were thinking of making a lengthy speech, we don't have a lot of time, so I'd be grateful for people to keep their questions brief. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Larry Bridwell, and I teach international business at Pace University. This past summer, I taught for 4 weeks at the Free University of Berlin, and I had dinner with a recently retired member of the German parliament, and he mentioned a story that was startling to me, that during the Euro crisis, President Obama has been calling the leaders of the Southern European countries to call Chancellor Merkel and put more pressure on Germany to be more responsive. Now, in the American culture that I grew up, that's called butting into somebody else's business. And I note here that the title of this is the Euro-American Relations in Times of Crisis. Could you comment on the appropriateness of both Secretary Geithner and President Obama interfering in what I consider to be a European issue?
Thank you for your question. It's fair to say, in my role here, that this administration, again, no political judgment here, especially not today, the day of the debate, but it's fair to say that this administration has been very helpful from the beginning in the management of the Eurozone crisis. In many respects, through Tim Geithner and the Treasury, with whom we've had many contacts, I mean, on a day-by-day basis, with Ben Bernanke and the Fed, which is in close contact, of course, with the ECB, through the actors in Wall Street. From day one, we have been aware that there is a supportive American partner in this fight against the crisis, I mean. And it's true that President Obama, a few months ago, together with us, by the way, together with the new French president, President Hollande, was in the forefront of efforts to put more emphasis on growth, not only on fiscal consolidation, austerity, as we say in Europe, but on growth. And on this, the fact that he publicly actually said what he thought was not a source of concern for us, I must say, although I respect, of course, your question. Now, one of the key issues for the Eurozone today is to make sure that the northern part of the Eurozone and the southern part of it remain one body and not two separate bodies. And here again, you will recognize the French ambassador here, but here again, I think we, France, have a very special responsibility to make sure that these two parts of Europe, the north and the south, remain united around the same objectives. And that's what we do on a day-to-day basis, and again, with the support of our American friends.
Okay, the next question again, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Okay, hi, my name is Cody Smith. I'm a grad student here at Columbia. I just finished my master's degree in Heidelberg, Germany, sorry. And so you came very close to answering my question just a second ago. While I was in Germany, in Heidelberg, I heard from certain academics that there was a very strong will to divide the Eurozone into a northern and southern branch, into northern and southern branches. So how is it that we're going to go about solving that problem without doing that, perhaps? Because I know that the Germans are very unhappy with the current state of affairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I, to a certain extent, answered your question, which is a great question, and that indeed the only way forward, as I said at the beginning, is a step forward in terms of the European integration on every front: fiscal, political, banking union. That's the only way to make sure that everyone is on board and that the split between the northern and southern part of Europe don't last, and at the end of the day we remain a strong union, I believe.
Thank you very much for your talk. My name is Ramin Montazir. I'm a student here at the Columbia Law School. My question has to do with the crisis in the Middle East.
Yeah.
First, in regards to the Iranian nuclear issue, at some point there seems to be a little bit of a different position regarding the United States and France, whether there's a recognition of enrichment specifically up to 3.5%. And you mentioned you would like to see Iran change its behavior. What behavior would you like to see? And secondly, in regard to Syria, France is a much more active partner there. And what do you think the path forward is, and is France ready to support a no-fly zone, which Turkey has been calling for at some times? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Important questions. On Iran, we have two objectives, to oversimplify. One positive, to make sure that Iran changes course, and then to be able to help them become a civilian nuclear power while avoiding any form of military programs. And second, a negative objective, which is to avoid a war, which in current circumstances, it seems to us, would lead to potentially catastrophic results. Based on these two objectives, we are working hard to tighten the sanctions in order to try to convince the Iranian leadership to change course, in order to convince them that the choice to invest in a military program doesn't make any sense. And we tend to consider that the sanctions are working, that they bite. The fact that Europe established an oil embargo vis-à-vis Iran, the fact that it cut in half the oil revenues from Iran are, we believe, beginning to alter the behavior of the Iranian leadership. So it seems to us we have to continue this way. I must say, I see that you are very well informed within the negotiations. Of course, it's about the enrichment and such kinds of things, but we are on the same page with our American friends on this, and we think it would be too too early to give up the sanctions while the sanctions begin to have an effect on the Iranian leadership. But at the end of the day, again, our goal is to avoid war and to lead Iran toward a peaceful solution of the crisis, because we think Iran is a great country. We think Iranian public opinion is divided, and many people in Iran, as you know, have very pro-Western feelings more than in any other country, probably in the Muslim Arab world, Arab-Muslim world. So that's number one. Number two, on Syria, again, we think there is no option, no durable option without the removal of Assad, whom we consider to be a murderer of his own people. That's as clear as that. Now, as you know, we French have taken the lead to try to help the liberated zones, in order to give support, both humanitarian support, but also political support to the leadership in the liberated zones, so that they can live, they can have food, they can have health care, but so that they can also slowly but surely get used to exerting power, in order that at the end of the day, when Bashar leaves, the country is not in a chaos, but begins to be structured. So the goal here is to better structure and encourage the Syrian opposition. And on these two, again, we feel that there is a close working relationship with our American friends, and which is also very important, with many countries in the Arab League, for example, and the Arab Muslim world. So that's typically a good example where you don't have, contrary to what some of our press wants us to believe, it's not a clash of civilizations in Syria. It's a dictatorship versus more or less the end of the world. And on this, we are on the same boat with our American friends.
So we have, there's one more gentleman standing to ask a question, and we have a little bit more time. So I'm going to, if you just hold on 1 second, I'm going to ask a follow-up to this last question, and then give others a chance to join this queue behind the microphone. And the follow-up is about Syria, because France, when it argued very strongly in favor of intervention in the case of Libya, I mean, arguably that action would not have taken place without the strong support of President Sarkozy. And there are a couple aspects to this. One is that in a general way, a number of people took the action in Libya to be a measure of support for an emerging norm called the responsibility to protect. I think in France it might have a different name, the right to intervene. I'm not sure exactly about the language, but in the international lingo, as it were, it's known as the responsibility to protect. Of course, things got a little messy when the objectives shifted away from simply protecting populations that were being brutalized and overthrowing the regime of Gaddafi. People also notice, however, that there hasn't been the same intervention in the case of Syria. The human cost of the Syrian conflict is much greater. So it makes people wonder, do we take this norm seriously or not? And how will the international community, led by advocates like France, resolve these tensions? So how do you see this playing out in the future?
We do take very seriously the moral and political duty linked with the responsibility to protect. We think that's the core of what we are, our DNA, our democratic values. I think some certain things are unacceptable on this earth. What Assad did and continues doing to his own people is unacceptable. Now you have two main differences with the situation in Libya, where we together made a difference. The first is that, as you know, there is no consensus within the UN Security Council, and you have two countries, Russia and China, who three times put their veto to prevent any form of intervention from the international community. That's point number one, and it's a major difference with Libya, where we had a UN Security Council resolution. The second difference, of course, its countries are not the same size, but I would even say not the same configuration. And in Syria, it's true that a military intervention, if we should come to it, would be much more, and it's much heavier than it was in Libya, based on the resources of the regime, on its anti-aircraft capabilities that we would have to destroy before any intervention, based on the fact that the Alawites are part of the equation, 13% of the population, but that you have also the Sunni, the Shiite bases that are opposed to each other. And it's in this respect, the president of Bosnia would be to a certain extent more appropriate than the president of Libya. So for these reasons, it's not a reason to do nothing, but that makes it much more difficult. And that's why for the time being, before there is any consensus, we try to convince the Russians and the Chinese, and we also try to work on a day-to-day basis on the ground with our American friends who tend to follow us, by the way, what we like, to help the opposition, to structure the opposition, to bring humanitarian help to people who badly need it, and at the end of the day, to get rid of Assad.
Okay. You've been very patient, please. If you could introduce yourself to begin. Thanks.
I'm short. So was Napoleon, wasn't he? Talking about modesty. Thank you. My name is Alfonso Diaz. On the very notion of the coalition of the willing, which I might be wrong, but I think it was even used during the, could I call those years the Bush-Cheney and Rumsfeld years. Don't you think that that's a risky policy? I mean, somehow it might bring back the Cold War with not around the found ideology, but about the most basic of ideologies, which is power. How would you defend that notion when you have not just two members of the Security Council, but two booming economies, particularly the Chinese economy, and other countries that might not be so willing to buy into that notion? Turkey, Brazil, you name them.
Thank you for the question. I think it's an interesting point. My perception is that the only way to go forward in the international arena is, so to speak, to walk on the two legs. The first leg being the legitimacy that only such bodies as the the UN Security Council can give, and the other leg being to have a critical mass of countries ready to go, ready to act. Otherwise, nothing happens, and we talk and talk and talk, and nothing happens. And that's why, for example, the Eurozone is a good illustration of this. You have 27 members of the European Union, among them 17 who decided to found the Eurozone, to go a step forward with the agreement of the others, the legitimacy of the European Union, but avoiding to have everybody on board, because otherwise it would not work. So I think that's the only way, again, to be efficient and legitimate on the world scene, is to have the backing of the international bodies like the UN Security Council, but at the same time to have the critical mass of countries ready to go. That's the same, for example, that we are trying to do in Sahel. You know, for us, the fight against Al-Qaeda is, of course, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, He's in Yemen, he's in Somalia, he's at home, but he's also in Sahel, in the northern part of Mali. And here it's, I believe, a good illustration of what we just said together. What we want to have in Mali is an intervention to get rid of the Al-Qaeda supporters in northern Mali, which are creating a kind of Sahelistan. In order to do that, we work on the two legs I was referring to. A first resolution of the Security Council a few days ago that we would like to complement by a second one in the coming days. And at the same time, to work with our American, Malian, Chad, and a couple of other countries to see which one of these countries together could form a force, an international African force, able to intervene on the ground. And the combination of the two, it seems to us, is the only way to get a result.
Okay, lovely. Next question.
Yes, hi. My name is Barbara Pressman. I'm an undergraduate student in School of General Studies. And a couple of things. First thing, I've been trying to get a business started for a couple of years here. And I was wondering how soon I can get a visa.
Okay.
And the other question I have, I've been wondering about for a long time. I was wondering if you could speak about how, prior to the Iraq War, Saddam Hussein apparently switched from trading oil on the dollar to the euro. And then after the invasion, the oil was traded back on the dollar. And I just wondered how that may have affected the euro over the years, or if you could comment on that fluctuation at all.
Okay. So on the visa question, I'll give you my card at the end of the exchange, but it's a fair question. And if I can help, I will do help. On the second question, I don't think, quite frankly, this Saddam Hussein's game with the euro profoundly changed the equation. What I'd like to say, though, on this point is how much we French believe in the international justice. It's very painful. It's very difficult. As you very kindly said, a century ago, I was on President Chirac's foreign policy team dealing with the situation in Bosnia. And there we had to deal with Karadzic, Mladic, and these kind of war criminals. And very painfully, slowly but surely, we together with the US, with other countries, we establish an international justice system that it seems to us is absolutely vital if we want to promote the responsibility to protect you were referring to, and if we want to avoid such genocides, as much as we can, of course, such genocides from happening in the future.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Kitsy Smith. I'm a dual degree student with Sciences Po and Columbia, and I met you last year, 2 summers ago, at the European American Chamber of Commerce Ambassador debate, where you spoke with U.S. Ambassador Rivkin. Yeah. So I wanted to go back to your comments about the Security Council reforms, and you mentioned Germany being possibly becoming a new member. And I was wondering if it would not be considered an over-representation on the part of Europe, and whether there would be any appetite for a European Union seat, as opposed to having these 3 countries. And furthermore, going along with that, if there were 3 in these 3 very strong European Union countries, does that not create already within the European Union resentment among the other countries, as we've seen the rise of more right-wing nationalist parties in certain countries? Thank you.
Again, it's a very good question, I must say. On this, we French are strongly committed to the enlargement of the Security Council for one simple reason. We consider that the Security Council as it is a reflection of the world in the aftermath of World War II, but doesn't reflect the world as it is today. And it cannot last too long, because if it does, then the emerging powers who are not part of the Security Council will or would, and to a certain extent rightly so, try to act outside the Security Council. And we consider it's really vital to keep this body, the Security Council of the UN, as the backbone of the international institutions in terms of security. So for these reasons, we are committed to enlarging the Security Council. We think countries like France and Britain, quite frankly, have given all they do, all we do in terms of peacekeeping, in terms of international security, have their place in the Security Council, but we consider that others should join the club. I mentioned Germany, Japan, India, and a couple of others, so that at the end of the day, we have a body that can give international actions the legitimacy it needs to reach what I called a bit earlier, a more effective multilateralism. Again, in tomorrow's world, we believe you have two ways to be more efficient and more legitimate on the world scene: more effective multilateralism on one side, through the enlargement of the Security Council, for example, and on the other side, a new form of concert of nations, a concert of great powers, where the G20, it seems to us, is probably the key body to give impulsions.
I was going to ask as a follow-up to that.
I was trying to avoid a follow-up precisely.
Yeah, well, these are difficult issues, no question about it. So easy to be an academic. But the Security Council, I think, if you were to expand the membership, it would have more legitimacy. Now, of course, it would still exclude countries, and to them, they may see that legitimacy is still lacking. So that's part of the problem of expanding. But the other is the veto. And you've already mentioned before that when France, the United States, when there was a moral case for interventions, Kosovo is another example. The Security Council has not always given support. Sometimes coalitions of the willing have worked around that. But would it be true that if we expanded the size of the Security Council while retaining the veto, which is pretty hard to dispense with, that the UN would be any more effective?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the veto right. There are thoughts, and for example, our former Foreign Minister Hubert Védrine, who was in Washington a few weeks ago, made very articulate proposals to try to establish a kind of code of conduct in order to avoid the use of veto right in case of, for example, interventions having to do with a humanitarian catastrophe. And I think it's exactly the kind of thought that we must promote in order to have both a body able to act, to give legitimacy, but which is not paralyzed despite the veto right.
I agree with that. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you very much for speaking with us today. My name is Christopher Minora. I work at the Clinton Global Initiative. Soon I hope to represent the United States as a diplomat in the Foreign Service. So I'm curious as to what do you think is the most important cooperative message that a French or a EU diplomats and United States diplomats need to bring to their host countries and their placements abroad?
In general, you mean our...
the most important cooperative message you think all, EU or United States diplomats should take with them into their foreign placements?
Again, my own view on this would be to consider that Europeans and Americans are each other's closest allies, that we are together the backbone of the new multipolar world, both on the security front and on the economic front and on the global challenges front, global warming, environment, arms control, and I could go on and on. What we must avoid, we, the transatlantic community, is to appear like a kind of holy alliance vis-à-vis the rest of the world. So it's absolutely vital to try to answer honestly your question, that we remain close, but that in no circumstance we give the impression to our Chinese friends, to our Indian friends, Brazilian friends and others, that we are a kind of club of the rich countries willing to preserve our privileges in on the international scene. So I really believe we can work together while avoiding any form of protectionism, first, and second, any kind of lecturing, any kind of I told you so attitude, any kind of what could seem like a holy alliance. Again, that's an expression of Hubert Védrine that I believe our new minister, Laurent Fabius, also used. We don't want, especially in today's world, to act like this. We are privileged partners in many respects, but again, on every given issue, we have to have other partners on board if we have to act. So the key of the success of the transatlantic partnership in today's and tomorrow's world is open-mindedness.
Yes, this will be our last question.
Good afternoon, thank you. I have a question regarding, my name is Daniel Levy and I'm an entrepreneur here. I have a question regarding the intitulé, the title of this conference, about the crisis. And the root of a crisis usually is about the inability of understanding each other or communicating with each other. So, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, what would you say to all the French entrepreneurs who want to come here, but sadly, regarding, there's a study from the EU saying that France is lagging in English. We're probably the worst before Spain as far as the understanding of the English language. So what do you say to all those people who want to come here but are not fully prepared to understand and communicate in the best way as you do, and also to your colleagues at Luque or at the highest echelons of the states who do not master the language as well as you do and therefore can lead to crisis in understanding each other?
You're a true diplomat. You're too kind. But no, actually, it's a good point. I thought, speaking of entrepreneurship, that you would think we can do better. Of course, we can do better. But again, one of the key messages I wanted to convey at the beginning of my talk was the fact that entrepreneurship is booming in France like never before. And it's counterintuitive compared to the press report that we all read in the American and the international and even the French press, by the way. So this booming entrepreneurship, this unprecedented innovation process I was referring to, are really the two key fundamentals illustrating the vitality of the French economy, the fact that we are, will be, want to remain on the winning side of globalization. Now, that's a very fair question about foreign languages. We, French, it kills me to say that, but we are not the world champions in terms of teaching of foreign languages, so we have to do better. And everybody knows that. Quite frankly, I think we made some progress over the last years or so. In the younger generations, for example, I meet many, many more people, especially among the entrepreneurs, who master the English language much better than I do and are really bilingual. That's the case of my two kids, for example, to mention only them. So I think we are much better than we were a few years ago. But still, if we compare with the Germans, with people in Holland and others in Europe, we, as we diplomats say, on a une marge de progression. We can even do a bit better, and we will.
Well, I must say, I'm rather embarrassed because my French, I'm looking at a French professor right now, my French is quite appalling, and yet I'm invited to come to France pretty regularly and have come for a very long time, and I've noticed no improvement in my language, but a tremendous improvement in the language of my French hosts. And I must say that's much to my embarrassment. So I'm pleased to say that my daughter spent a good part of this summer in France. She doesn't want to repeat the same mistakes of her father, and she will learn the French language, and I think that would be even better. Well, thank you very much. I think a round of applause for these questions. And especially the answers. So thank you, everyone, for participating with that. I now want to turn to my colleague, the Dean of Humanities, Pierre Force, and he will close with some remarks. And then after that, if he doesn't tell us, I know we're all going to be invited for a reception outdoors. So please, Pierre.
Yes, so it is my great pleasure to thank you, Ambassador Delattre, on behalf of Nick Dirk, Executive Vice President for Arts and Sciences, and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. As I was looking at the title of your talk today, this brought back memories of a talk given by one of your predecessors many years ago, and I remember I had the honor of introducing him, and he talked about the French-American relationship. The focus of your talk today was about the Euro-American relationship, and I think this says a lot about the evolution of things, one should add, in spite of all the Eurosceptics here and in Europe, European integration is a reality, and it is here to stay. I would like to close with a personal note. As Roxy Smith mentioned during her introductory remarks, you were Consul General here in New York for a number of years. And here I think I'm speaking on behalf of all of us who had the privilege of meeting you and working with you. Everybody has fond memories of those years. We all remember the simplicity of your manners, your accessibility, your personal warmth. You were and you still are the embodiment of everything that is noble in public service. And this is why we were so delighted when you heard that you were appointed Ambassador of France to the United States. So, Mr. Ambassador, cher François, vous êtes ici chez vous. Welcome home.